Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. I see that people are still filtering in from their breakout sessions, but we're ready to get started with our closing plenary session, Becoming Built for Zero, The Future of Our Work, by Nate French. We're honored to have with us today. I want to thank everyone for being so flexible with all of this. I know these are certainly crazy times, but the world doesn't stop spinning, as we often say. We recently had a very close hurricane threat in the mayor's office. And it's so wild kind of going through life while COVID is still happening, because the world continues spinning around us, even though it seems like the world has ended sometimes. The world keeps going, and we have to adapt to that. And everyone who is here, your adaptability is a testament to the work that you do, and I want to thank you for being here. I'd like to introduce Nate French at this time, who's going to be our closing plenary speaker. As a portfolio lead for Community Solutions, Nate works directly with communities to build and improve systems to end homelessness. He manages Built for Zero's Breakthrough Collaboratives portfolio, where he works intensively with local partners to push towards the goal of ending veteran and chronic homeless using data-driven interventions. Nate comes to Community Solutions from the grassroots work in Los Angeles to build a coordinated entry system. Through his firsthand experience, he believes that our greatest hope in solving our most pressing, complex social problems is through empowering local communities to create unique solutions and take creative action. At this time, please join me in welcoming Nate French.
Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here with all of you. I don't think included in the introduction is the fact that, when I started working at Community Solutions, one of the first things I did was make a trip to Honolulu, and that was in 2015. And more or less, I've been working with you all ever since then on veteran homelessness and systems building work. And so it's just been such a joy and a pleasure to be along that journey with you, and just appreciate the honor to come and share some thoughts with you all today about becoming built for zero and lessons from the future. I just want to start by saying that, I come as representative of Community Solutions and a partner in your work there. But I also come as a grandson of a World War II veteran and the brother-in-law of a post 9/11 veteran who was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan in the 2000s. And so veterans are personal to me. They are personal to my family. And so, I come from that place too, of really caring about this personally. And I know that this matters so much for so many reasons, not just for veterans, but the families and the friends and the people that love and care about veterans. And I just like to stay centered on that. It's a way to start the talk. That's my why. That's, I think, our why for so many of us that do this, and that we know that veterans are overrepresented in homelessness, and we know that, but we don't talk about that much. But we know that on average, more veterans experience homelessness than the average person. And so they need our care and they need our attention. And this is a good thing to be doing. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I just want to say that veterans matter, and this is personal. Anyway, glad to be here. Well, so I entitled the talk here, Becoming Built for Zero. And obviously our initiative in the United States and really globally now is called Built for Zero. So this isn't a way to push my brand on you, but it's really a provocation that I think is underneath why we chose the name Built for Zero. And that is that it's an invitation for us to ask ourselves, what do we need to become? What kinds of systems do we need to build, not to manage homelessness, but to end homelessness? And that the systems that we have to build have to evolve over time. And so they really are becoming constantly. They're always becoming the next version of that system that it needs to become to get to the next goal that you're trying to reach. And so that's underneath my title. And so I want to open that provocation and question for all of you to think about as I'm going through this question of what does it look like in Honolulu to be built for zero, to have a system that is truly built to get to zero and to really sustain zero for veterans and everyone experiencing homelessness at the end of the day. Mark asked me to share a little bit about I think Lessons from the Future, I think is a slightly different title, but what can we see down the road? What are we learning? What are we seeing in the future that we can think about now? And how can we start to draw down on those lessons? And so, we've had so many communities reach functional zero for veterans. And so some of what I'm going to share today comes from those communities and those lessons that we've learned. But really, I'm going to focus on two communities that are on their way to ending all homelessness. They have ended veteran homelessness. They have ended chronic homelessness and are very close in both communities to ending youth homelessness, and have within the next 18 months set goals to end all homelessness, and we'll be the first cities in the country to do that. And when I thought about, well, what is the future? I think these communities are a sort of red herring about the future that we can look to. And I bet if you're looking at this, you're thinking, these communities aren't really like Honolulu in so many ways. And I think you are exactly right. But I think Honolulu, what American city is like Honolulu? In my experience, I've never been to one quite like the metro area that you have and how you're situated there on the island. So I invite you, as I use these two communities as examples, not to think of this as a comparison between two communities, but as a set of principles and lessons that look really different in the way they get applied, but are really universal, I think, in the way that all communities need to be thinking in terms of ending homelessness, and good things to remember and lessons learned. Okay, so I have 5 lessons I'm going to share with you all and give you a few examples. We'll go through them here. So let me hear the next slide. So first, the first lesson from the future is the one that you probably hear us all talk about, but this just remains to be true for Gulf Coast and Rockford as they're ending all homelessness, is that they let data shape the path forward, that they really use their data to understand what is the path to get from where they are now to the goal of ending all homelessness. And so one of the first things that we did when we started working with them on this big goal was to look across all their data, but not just data for youth or families or single adults or veterans or chronic, but just across all their system data. We looked at, mapped all of that data. We also looked at all of their resource data about the composition of all of their assets in the community, the number of subsidies, the amount of units that they control for housing, all those kinds of things. And together, in looking at all of that data, collaborated to sort of map a path forward to see what were the next set of milestones that made sense to them, that were showing up in the data, that showed where the opportunity was to find their way towards this ultimate goal of ending all homelessness. And we could see in Rockford, for instance, that when they looked at their data, that they were short about 200 housing units that they were going to need to end all homelessness. They could see that through their asset mapping, and they could see that through their homelessness data. And so they started to think about how would we acquire 200 units, and to get creative and realize they needed an entity, a different kind of organization that could receive these kinds of resources and administer them, something called CHODO, CHDO is the acronym, Community Housing Development Organization. And so started to build this new kind of entity that could house all of this 200 units that they needed and wanted to acquire. So the data sort of led them to that conclusion and that path forward. And in Gulf Coast, it was a very different scenario that in their community, they identified that unsheltered homelessness was the next key milestone that they needed to hit. And that they realized if they could end unsheltered homelessness, that they would essentially end homelessness for all single adults. And so their data showed them that that was the path. And so I think the lesson here is that there's no playbook that we can give to every community that's going to be the same. The data is going to look different in each place. Every community is unique, and we have to let that data pull us forward. We need real-time data across systems eventually, in the same way that you now have monthly veteran data that you're looking at, that you don't have to wait for the Pitt County cheer. You can see it in real time, pretty close to real time, what's happening in your system. That needs to be true for everybody experiencing homelessness, especially as you broaden the lens to ending all homelessness. And I think, this has never been more true than right now with COVID, that COVID is raising all of these new concerns, these different kinds of concerns, infection rates among people experiencing homelessness, making sure that people are in quarantine and isolation beds, All of those things require data to really have a true sense of what is the nature of the problem and how do we know if we're solving it? How do we know that we're getting closer? Yeah, let data shape the path forward. Next, build real collaborative partnerships across sectors. In Rockford, the formation of this community housing development organization required a lot of partnership around government and other community entities that had not previously worked together. And that was some real work that had to get done, and realized that some of those partnerships might have been better to be forming upstream, that if they'd been thinking ahead about what partnerships would be required down the road, that they might have gotten there faster. And so I think it's wise to be thinking about this early. And I use real and collaborative here because I think there are partnerships where, you know, when the rubber meets the road, maybe we all show up to a meeting, but we're not really like this. We're not really working together. We're not linked arm in arm. And that those are really, you know, people coming to the same meeting is not really collaboration in so many ways, unless in that meeting they're truly thinking about how to weave together what they do in a way that creates something greater than the sum of its parts. In Gulf Coast, you know, they in identifying unsheltered homelessness realized that they really needed to partner with law enforcement. They did not have enough outreach coverage, and they didn't have funding to get new outreach workers or hire new outreach staff. And so they spent a lot of time developing a partnership with law enforcement that could work in tandem with outreach and work as law enforcement in a way that was in alignment with the values of people that cared about people experiencing homelessness. And we're doing that in a way that treated people with respect and dignity and still really helped get the job done. So I just encourage that as you think about partnerships, don't just think about what you need now, but what will you need down the road? How can you start thinking earlier about building those relationships, because they do take time to build, and it's not something, I think, in our experience that you can rush. And to really lean towards what does real and collaborative look like for multiple entities that you need at the table to get to where you need to go. And, you know, as these communities have worked towards ending all homelessness, they find more and more that there's new kinds of partners that they need. Just to give you an imagination, if you're ending youth homelessness, you need to be connected with education and with the child welfare system and the foster care system, domestic violence programs, healthcare systems, health and human services. There are all these partners that maybe have been adjacent that need to become really true collaborators in the way that things are working. Next, lesson number 3 from the future. Be willing to remake ourselves to achieve the next stage of progress. That, you know, in order to get to an end to homelessness, the system typically has to transform multiple times over time to continue to adapt to the success that you're having, to reductions in homelessness, to transform programs to meet the next need. And sometimes those happen in small little increments over time. And then sometimes it has to happen in really big ways that take time to make those transformations. And so thinking ahead about what those assuming you will be on your way, and what those transformations are going to need to look like down the road can start to help you prepare and lay the groundwork for what those need to be. You know, in Rockford, Illinois, and Gulf Coast, where it's all homelessness they're trying to end, they're really asking the question, well, what does a system look like after we've ended all homelessness? What does a homelessness system look like when there really is no active homelessness in the community, where there's a very small amount of people only experiencing homelessness for, you know, maybe 30 days at most, and that's across the whole system. And their working theory is that it needs to look like a prevention system, that the system that used to be a homelessness services system that was really trying to catch up to the problem of homelessness and get people housed quickly needs to become a system that's really keeping people in their housing and making sure that if for some reason someone does experience homelessness, it's just for a few days, they're back inside very quickly. And as we say, like, homelessness shouldn't be a word that defines a person. You shouldn't call a person homeless. It should be a thing that might happen to people once in a while. And that's the vision of a future world. So in order to do that, you know, they've had to start to have really tough conversations about with you know, emergency shelter and programs that were built and designed around the current existing need of homelessness. Now that that need is not as great, they don't just want to leave those organizations in the dust and let them figure it out, but they really want to work together to say, well, what does a shelter become in a prevention system? What does a shelter program look like? What does an outreach program look like? What are the kinds of services we need to transform into delivering now in order to get to this final end state of ending all homelessness, preventing it from receding, into how it's been in the past. And so, I think a thing that I want to say here is that in terms of systems change, I think systems need to evolve at the rate in which progress is happening, because the prevention systems that Rockford and Gulf Coast may build would not be a system that a community that was still a long ways away from that goal would want to build right away. They might eventually get to wanting to build and transform a system into a prevention system, but there's several iterations that they've gone through, that they've reformed how their system functions, how their teams are organized, how leaders are coming around tables to match where they're at in that progression as they ended veteran homelessness, and then chronic homelessness, and then youth homelessness, and now are looking to end all homelessness. And so I really like to think of this as remaking ourselves as a continuous process. And that really takes a mindset that is willing to change, and embraces change as necessary and important. And that, we have a real determination and care more about the future that is without homelessness than we do for the comfort of our status quo. Because I think as human beings, we like stability. We like things to stay firm and stable, and change is hard. And so there's often an inner resistance that we just feel naturally to change. And that the more that we can embrace change and see that as a natural and necessary part of the journey to ending homelessness, the better off we'll be, and the quicker we can get there. And that leads me to this next thought, which is true, and I'm sure all of you have experienced at some level, which is that in needing to remake our systems and remake ourselves and reform the way that we do our work, that change is hard and change is messy. And that's what progress feels like, right? And that's the counterintuition here, because when we're in the hardness of change, and when we're in the messiness of change, no one's doing a victory lap. None of us are feeling like we're winning. We're not standing up on podiums, getting medals. We're figuring out data systems, and we're figuring out outreach coordination. We're figuring out how to document chronic status. We're doing all these things that are not glamorous and are not fun, frankly. But are necessary. And so I think, what I see in these communities is that they really embrace the hardness and messiness of change and normalize that, and don't see that as a signal that they're on the wrong path, or a signal that they should stop doing what they're doing, but a signal that they're actually on the right path, that change, when things are hard and messy because things are changing, that's actually a signal that you're moving in the right direction. And of course, we don't want to make things messy unnecessarily. But I think in terms of our own psychology, as we're in this work, we're in the trenches, remembering this, I find helpful to me. And often, I'm in the thing and I'm trying to figure something out on my end and what I do. And suddenly, a year later, we realize, oh man, something's different and better now, but it didn't feel like that along the way. It doesn't. So I think this is a good thing to remember. I'm just looking at my other notes here and seeing if I missed any other. Yeah. Oh yeah. Maybe just the other thing I would say about this is that I think that we see these communities, that have hit their own challenges. Rockford setting up this Chodo, and Gulf Coast has had similar challenges, with the politics in the community and relationships, and all the things that you're familiar with are all there, even for communities that are very far advanced in this work. I still deal with those changes and the messiness and hardness of this, but I think they tend to expect things not to go as planned now. They don't have an idealized version of how things will go. They know that inevitably things will come up and there will be bumps in the road. And so I think the more we keep that mindset, the more we can stay centered that we're on the right path, even when it feels hard. And so the last fifth one here I have is to continuously build commitments to end homelessness and cultivate a belief that it is possible. I cannot stress this enough, how important it is that you have a growing group of people in your community that are really committed to the goal of ending homelessness, and that they believe that it's possible. That's so critical, that the belief part even can be very instrumental in how you pull together and persevere through all of the challenges that I've been describing, through the messiness and hardness of what's happening. I'll just say quickly that in Rockford, they decided that they would be one of the first communities to end veteran homelessness. And so the way that they built this commitment to ending homelessness and cultivating a belief is that the mayor directly himself would ask for a weekly update from the team working on homelessness, looking at the data, and then would do a public monthly meeting where they would report out on their numbers and their progress, and really put it on display for everybody to see, and held up that lens to say, this is a serious commitment, and we're going to keep looking at this data and take it seriously. I wanted to share these lessons and these thoughts with you, and I hope they've been valuable so far. As I was thinking through each of these points, I started to realize that in Honolulu, in your work to end veteran homelessness, that really you also have been embracing all of these different lessons in different ways. That in letting the data shape the path forward, that in Honolulu, there was a decision to really focus on chronic veterans. That you could see in your data that you had, about 70 or 80 chronic veterans, and that strategically you use that data to make a choice about your path forward towards ending veteran homelessness, and really focused on housing and reducing the number of chronic veterans, and that has fallen by almost 50% since you started towards that goal. And so that's a way that I've seen you let data shape the path forward, that in terms of building real collaborative partnerships across sectors, that the Mayor's Challenge team is such a great representation of that work, that group is really bringing sectors together. And I heard a story the other day that Mark Alexander, that leads from the city for that team, has done things like asking buses to change routes or times of routes in order to solve problems, and bringing in city departments to help make changes and address problems. I think that is exactly the kind of thing that I mean when I say real and collaborative partnerships that have been developing over time. In terms of remaking yourself, I've seen you do such amazing work, and I will say nationally, you are really all-stars in this work to remake yourselves in terms of integrating coordinated entry into your VA-funded programs. I've yet to see another community with such great integration and coordination between VASH and SSVF programs and GPD programs and the coordinated entry system that you have there in the community. That you all have worked so hard to align data systems. And like I mentioned earlier, it's such a unglamorous thing to do. And nobody's going to write a news article about that, and you're not going to get your picture in the paper, but I can't tell you how important it is to have good data and to have your data systems aligned. And you all have persevered for multiple years, really, to bring those systems together and now have quality data. And that, just like in Rockford, as I was saying, the Mayor's Challenge group looks at their data every single meeting. That's the first thing. I've been on many, many webinar meetings for the Mayor's Challenge group, and they are continuously building a commitment to end homelessness and cultivating belief that is it possible. This conference is another expression of building that commitment to homelessness and cultivating a belief that it's possible. And I just can't help but show your data here and remark that this is just in this year from January 2020, and mind you, this is through COVID. As COVID was happening, you have made an almost 20% reduction in your total veteran actively homeless number, which are the green dots, from 278 down to 217. And for your chronic vets, from 104 all the way down to 71, that you have made, I think, a 30% reduction in just this calendar year for chronic vets, and a 20% reduction for all veterans experiencing homelessness. That's just so remarkable, and something that I think that you should feel really proud of. And I just want to share one more thought here before I close, that I just want to encourage that as you continue forward, that you stay grounded in improving the lives of people. And I know that you already do this in so many ways, that the Mayor's Challenge team includes people that are on the front line, thinking about strategy and see people experiencing homelessness every day to bring that perspective to the table, the way that the case conferencing functions as client by client, really treating people as individuals and collaborating and rallying around veterans specifically in order to get them into housing more quickly. And I just want to say, especially when we look at the data, that underneath the numbers in the data, right, are the lives of real people. And I never want to forget that. And we have to stay centered on what matters for veterans and those experiencing homelessness. And we should use that as our benchmark. When we're thinking about a strategy, when we're talking about an idea, our North Star should be, how is this going to help get veterans into housing faster when there's new funding on the table? How are we going to use this funding to make measurable reductions in homelessness by accelerating housing outcomes and keeping people stable in that housing over time? We know that housing is always a good idea. That housing is always a good idea. And housing should be the first idea and the thing that we are most determined to make happen for people in order for them to stay safe and alive. And certainly all of you are embracing that principle as well. So I'm here from the future to tell you that you're on your way in Honolulu. Please take your accomplishments, all the things that I just talked about, really seriously and celebrate those. And I just encourage you all to acknowledge your strengths here and to keep building on those. There's always more room to improve, but build on the things you've done well and the strengths that you have. We're here with you in the journey of Community Solutions and Built for Zero as you continue to become Built for Zero alive. Thanks for
Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you for those stirring words. It's now time for our closing remarks. First, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this two-day conference. Your work is actively making the world a better place, and your flexibility and adaptiveness is a testament to the work that you do. The Mayor's Challenge team would like to acknowledge and thank all of the speakers and facilitators who have graciously given their time, their knowledge, their expertise, their experience, and services voluntarily for our first Homeless Veterans Virtual Conference. We hope that the attendees enjoyed the opportunity to learn new techniques and gain new skills to help in their efforts to help those most vulnerable in your communities.